Hello out there. Welcome to the No Shit Cast. I'm your host, Matt Frazier. Your co-host tonight, the Grey Wizard of History himself, Mr. Eric D. Smith.
Hello.
And on deck to talk to us about her art and her work, Cat Hall from Dissonance. A little bit of housekeeping tonight. We found out today that we are now officially the flagship podcast for the X Factory Creative Network.
Fantastic.
It's kind of an honor. We've been working with the X Factory for a while now. They've been doing a lot of promotion and stuff like that for us. We've been working with Tangent, and it's been very good for us. I think our view count's up like 900% or some ridiculous thing since we started working with them. But big shout out to Tangent. Thank you so much for all you do for us, bud. And I would like to encourage anybody that's hearing this, if you get the chance, go check out the X Factory. Especially if you're an artist, if you're looking for someone to collaborate with, or if you're looking to get some exposure, it's a great tool for you to use, and It's a wonderful community. So on deck, like I said, we have Cat Hall from Dissonance. She's here to talk to us tonight. How you doing tonight, Cat?
I am here. I'm existing. I'm doing pretty good. Thanks.
It's what's the saying? Any day above ground's a good day, right?
Yes.
Right.
Although it is pretty cold up here.
Yeah.
We actually had a really warm day today. It was like 62.
Yeah, I was looking at the temperature there, and you're like going to be down to like 45 at the low, right?
Right. But like last week it was like 11, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've had our little cold snap, and now it's warming up. So
I lived in Texas for 6 years. I lived in Lamar County in Paris, Texas.
Ah.
But it never really, I think it snowed once while I was there.
I guess we should say it, right? That Cat's in Texas. So that I don't think we said that.
I live in a small suburb north of Dallas. It's actually north of Plano, just north of Plano, and just south of McKinney. So if you are familiar with the Dallas area, that is where I am.
A little bit.
Allen.
Yeah. I was young when I lived there, but I'm a little bit familiar with that. When did you find it to be any kind of adjustment when you moved from New York to Dallas-Fort Worth?
Yes and no. I mean, I grew up in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is by all rights, a fairly small city.
Gotcha.
And although I think it's probably the third largest city in Louisiana, it's still small by New York standards. So, I kind of was already used to the South. I pretty much knew the drill. And although New York had become pretty much home, I lived there for, I believe, 2.5 years. Not a huge amount of time, but I loved it. It was great.
And Dallas-Fort Worth is a pretty metropolitan city, isn't it?
Dallas-Fort Worth is a huge metropolitan area.
Yeah, it's enormous.
Actually, the Frisco area, which is north of Dallas and Carrollton, and Plano, is the fastest growing corridor in the U.S. right now, from what I understand, real estate wise. So yeah, it's booming right now.
Is there an electronic scene down there for music?
Yes and no. We do have some electronic bands, but the club scene is not such that there's much of a drive for live electronic music. It's more DJ driven.
Gotcha.
And so, there's some dance clubs, and as far as dark wave goes, really the standby club is still Lizard Lounge. It was back in the day, back in the late 80s, and it still is now, early 90s. Lizard Lounge, they have a night that they call the Church, which is, of course, on Sunday nights, and that's their Gothic night, and they're still in existence. They're still going strong. That's good. Yeah, I don't. I have to admit that my clubbing days. I now much prefer to sit at home in the studio and write music.
I understand that.
Yeah.
I certainly can feel that. Yeah.
Right. I have gone out a couple of times in the not too distant past to distribute a couple of little disc drives with my new MP3s on them, stuff that is coming out. So
that's cool.
Passing out some stuff, but and people still recognize me. So, I haven't changed that much.
It's a lot easier today, isn't it? Or what's your opinion on this? To kind of stay connected to the scenes, because of social media and things like that. It still allows you to kind of have that connection without having to do the club crawls all the time and
Yeah,
things,
it
right?
does. I would say that it is, but on the other hand, I do believe that it's less personal. When we were, when Dissonance was actually like right when our first album came out, and even before then, when we were, just playing around a lot of clubs on the Dallas scene, we touched hands with a lot more people. We seemed to interact with a lot more bands, and it was just more of a circuit. But now it's very much a studio element. That's pretty much how it's been, especially because my entire last album was recorded with somebody in Arizona, so whom
Oh
I've never
wow.
met.
And that's
So that's Justin Burning.
Justin Burning, right? Okay.
Yeah, never met him, and
Wow.
we've gotten along famously and seem to have a chemistry, as far as the music goes, and so that's worked out very nicely. And even before then, I had started. I'm getting ahead of myself,
That's okay.
but I had started working on the third Dissonance album with David Sabrin, my original co-writer for the first Dissonance album and for Reincarnate. And we got about 3 songs into it, and David just decided he was at a point in his life where he really just couldn't focus on music. He had a lot of personal issues going on. And so he decided that he was going to bow out. And so Dissonance became my project. And I was kind of stuck holding the bag trying to find somebody to work with because I am a lyricist vocalist. I can write, as far as like, keyboards or sequencing goes, but that's not my forte. That's not what I choose to do.
Right.
So I really enjoy working with a co-writer or a producer. And so I, basically hit the pavement looking for that. And the first person I came across was in Brazil. So,
Wow.
and we did several tracks. There was a guy in the Sao Paulo area. I think he lives in Campinas now, but his name is DJ Junior Kane. He
Yeah.
did some remixes for Information Society
Yep.
back in the day.
Yep. Still does, I
And
think.
yes, he does. And he and I have done a few tracks together. I also started working with Jim Marcus from De Wartzow and Go Fight. That is still on the table. He is producing my next Dissonance project. Actually, I shouldn't say next because I technically have 2 albums in process right now. Both of them are going to be Dissonance, but one is a second album with Justin Burning, and the other one is the original third Dissonance album that was supposed to come out, which didn't because Void came out before it.
Okay.
So yeah, it's kind of confusing, but
Does that have a
there's
name yet?
it's
Probably not.
going to be called Break Myself.
Okay.
After a track that I wrote with Justin. Not Justin. I'm sorry, with Junior Kane.
Gotcha.
I'm getting too many J's mixed up.
Yeah, I took a list
But
of the people who had you'd worked with, and I recognized a few of those names, but there were many different people in the collective.
yeah, we've got lots of people that we work with, and that's something that's there's strength in numbers. I mean, there's so
there
many
is, yeah,
talented
definitely.
people out there,
And
and that's just one of those things that I realized. I was like, why be insular? Why not just kind of reach out and
yeah, it makes every album different too. Like when you listen to each album, they're definitely distinct, I think, in the emotional range of those albums.
right.
I so I find just personally Come to Mama to be very whimsical and playful,
Yes, it is. It is.
and as opposed to Void, which is extremely serious content. Let me take you back. I'm just curious, when you were growing up, what was your first interest in music? Like, when did you first start singing and realizing that you had a voice, such a beautiful voice that it is, and start utilizing that and realizing that? Was that like in school or anything, or how did that come about for you?
It was as early as preschool.
Wow.
I remember being involved in school productions. You know, growing up through the years, being in choir and going to solo festivals, competitions, which, I usually did pretty well. And, that was junior high and high school. And, when I graduated high school, which was in 1988, I met a guy. Well, I had already known him actually. He went to the same high school, but he graduated in '84. His name is Bob Durham. And Bob, had a lot of drive, to be a musician. He's a saxophone player and keyboardist, and he's a very successful producer in his own right. He owns a company now called Duradero Drums, and he said, I want to start a band and I need a singer, so why
Is
don't you do this?
is
And hmm?
I was just say, is that when it started for you? I mean, is that when you knew you wanted to do this sort of work, or is that just when you started considering it professionally?
That was just kind of a whim still.
Okay.
Sure, everybody wants to, I mean, when I thought about what I was going to do, I really had no idea. I mean, when I was in school, I got my degree in cultural geography and anthropology with a minor in French, just because I just really, wanted to do something interesting. And I like geography. I like people. I like
Sure.
culture.
Yeah.
I like travel. And so, plus my father was a geography professor, and I'd been involved in traveling all of my life, and just studying different cultures. And so that's kind of where I got that wanderlust from.
Gotcha.
Um,
I definitely
so
enjoyed my anthropology classes when I took them.
right, right,
Sociology and
it's
anthropology.
entertaining,
It
right?
is. Yeah.
So we learn more about ourselves the more we learn about other people. And so I basically just got a degree. Both of my parents were college professors at Louisiana State University, which is where I got my degree. And although I went to the one in Shreveport, not the one in Baton Rouge, so it was a smaller campus.
Yep. Yep.
But my mom taught math and computer science. My dad taught geography and anthropology and folklore. So it
So,
was it
gosh, that
was
sounds like a really rich environment to grow up in. Did you have siblings, or was it just you?
I do have an older sister. She's 2 years older than me.
Oh,
She
wow.
was an English major.
Wow.
And so, we were a very academic family.
Very cool.
So, when I was in college, going to LSU with Bob Durham, he decided he wanted to start this band. And I said, sure, why not? I mean, I was already very much in love with the club scene and electronic music, which I discovered thanks to a friend of mine in high school whose name was Mark Serino. He basically just would drive me over to Dallas on weekends sometimes, and we would go to a record store here called VVV, which actually was, I don't remember whether it was owned by or just the guy that worked there. He was MC 900 Foot Jesus.
Yeah.
So yeah, I used to buy my records from MC 900 Foot Jesus at VVV.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I'd go in and basically just say, what's cool, and he would go and pick out a whole stack of stuff, and I would be like, yeah, that's great, that's awesome. And so that's kind of how I started really loving the electronic scene and really loving the club scene.
And
And of course, this is where I got my taste for what I would be doing. Um, So, we started doing this little band, and we had it was fortuitous. The high school that I went to was an arts and academics high school. It was Caddo Parish Magnet High School, which was, actually been, um, I guess, the birthplace of a lot of pretty successful musicians. Brady Blade was our drummer, and he's done a lot of production work and been just a real success in his own right. His little brother Brian Blade was in my class, and he's on Blue Note Records, and does a lot of jazz and and just amazing artists have come out of this high school
Wow.
that I went to. Anyway, working with these people, we just kind of threw some stuff together and did some live shows. We didn't really do any recording as such, so it was all live. I think I have one cassette tape that is from that era, and
What was the
when
name
I
of that
listened,
band?
the band was called Vis-a-Vis.
Okay.
And it's a little bit cheesy, but we had a good time. There was a club in Shreveport called 630 Commerce, and it was kind of an industrial dance club, and we would play live there because Bob knew the owner, and we were kind of the house band there for a while.
And the era, what era of music was this band? What?
It was kind of a mishmash. We had keyboards, we had saxophones, we had live drums and live guitar and bass, and so it was very eclectic.
Very much like the late 80s type of synth pop bands that were coming
synth
up.
pop, but it also had some funk in it. It very much, we had some backbone. So just I don't know. I'll send you a picture of that band at some point, and you'll be able to see, kind of the look of the band will show you kind of what we sounded like.
Groovy.
Flocks of seagulls, right?
Yeah, well, it was an interesting look.
I did have that haircut in the late 80s.
Right.
With the very long bangs.
Right. So, doing that was fun, and that we did shows periodically, and everything changed when I went to an Information Society show in 1989. I had gone to see a lot of bands, and was just never really impressed by any of them, but this was really one of the first I guess just kinetic, interesting live shows that I'd been to by an electronic act, because I'd been to see New Order, I'd been to see the Pet Shop Boys, but they pretty much just stand there and do their thing. And this was a show where their lead singer was rolling around on roller skates, and everybody's jumping around, and it was crazy and awesome, and I was just blown away.
Still like that today.
Yes, and I was just gaga for them. I was such a fangirl. And, I decided that I was going to write a fan letter. You get bored, you do what you're going to do over the Christmas holiday when you're staying with your grandparents, when you're in, school and stuff. So I wrote a fan letter and I mailed it, and I didn't think about it again. And I guess maybe about 2 or 3 months later, my phone rang. And when I came home that afternoon from my college classes, there was a voice on the answering machine that was definitely not Southern. It was from Minnesota, and it was Kurt Larson.
Wow.
Saying that he had gotten my letter and they were going to be doing a show in my state, and would I like to come?
Wow.
And I was floored. I was just like, this is fate. This is, I'm meant to go and see this band and connect in some way. And so I did. I basically drove to Alexandria, Louisiana, which is where they were having the show, and went to the show, and just I didn't have any ticket or pass. I just kind of walked backstage and said, I'm Kat, I'm here. I got invited, and it just kind of fell in my lap.
Is this on their Think tour?
This was, it was on the Think tour. Okay. They were touring with Vanilla Ice. It was,
oh my,
it was entertaining.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it was pretty funny because Kurt and Paul would take turns reading out of Ice by Ice, Vanilla Ice's autobiography on stage, kind of making fun of him while they were opening for him. So it was pretty awesome.
Oh yeah,
they were
definitely.
ballsy. They were great. So I saw the show and then went back to the hotel and sat in the bar with Jim and Paul, and just had a few drinks and was talking to everybody, and I was like, this is really awesome.
Wow.
And I had sent the letter to Kurt, and so I thought, well, I really should speak to him, but Kurt is not a drinker and he doesn't really like to hang out in bars, and so went and hung out with him for a while separately, and had a good conversation, and we kind of hit it off and decided to stay connected. And so a correspondence was struck, and I stayed in touch. And basically through them, I also met another electronic band that was closer to me. T42 is out of the Dallas area. And so Will LeConto and Jay Gillian are the duo there. And, I got to know them pretty well. I basically just walked back, to their backstage when they were playing one time. And I said, hey, I know your producer, Paul Robb. I've met him, and they were like, oh, cool, whatever, They just thought I was supposed to be there. Nobody ever told me I couldn't walk back there. So I just did. It was entertaining.
Cool.
Yeah. So I met all of these people, and they all would have a very important role to play later. At the time I was still in college, and then I went to grad school at UT Austin for a semester, and I just decided, that was not what I wanted to do. After a semester of being kind of pent up in a dormitory, I said, I need to do something different. I need to travel. I need to be in a different place, a more industrial place. Austin is a very crunchy granola kind of town. Don't get me wrong, I love Austin. It's a great place, but
just not
for
the
me
place
at the
to be
time,
for what you want to achieve.
it wasn't what I needed at the time. I love it now, and it is a great music town, but I wanted something a little bit more toothy, I guess. So I moved to New York, the city where the weak are killed and eaten. And
let me say real quick. Let me interject here at your move to New York and say, well done with all of that. I talked with Kurt, but I was so much worse at how I went about it and intrusive. Just not in a mean way or anything, but just in a dumb way. And it started off with, I was trying to get a hold of one of their albums, a CD5 for Think, and I could not find it anywhere around me. So I had their management's address, so I called information and got the number. And I started talking with the people there about it, and they thought that I was trying to book the band. And I'm like, no, I'm just trying to get this CD. And
Are
they're
you
like,
talking to Scott Mino?
yeah, it was his secretary that was talking to me. And so they ended up sending me in the mail the CD5 and the cassette for Think for free.
Isn't that nice?
Yeah, it is. It's so nice. And I continued to talk with her a little bit. And then when they released Peace and Love Incorporated, you know how there was the track at the back that you could print out on a fax?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I couldn't figure out how to do that because I wasn't able to do it. Didn't have a way to do it. So I called that secretary again, and she gave me a memo that Kurt had given her in case anyone had any questions about this. She sent that to me. It had his phone number on it. I called his phone number. He had no idea who I was. He was in the middle of moving from Minnesota out to California, and I left some messages on his phone, and he tried to get back with me, and my wife at the time was on the phone, and he couldn't get back to me. And when he finally did, he was very exasperated and wanted to know who I was, and I explained to him who I was, and once he realized who I was, he directed me to the Cat.
Oh, but that's not me.
Right, exactly. So, and I'll explain that in a minute for the listeners, just so they know what you're saying there. But so, anyways,
that was the source of a lot of confusion for a lot of people.
It's for me for sure. Yeah,
it had to be crazy. Yeah.
So I hooked up with her and started talking with her, and she told me that he was moving out to California, and he had said as much. So I, in a moment,
and her name is Jerry Beck.
Okay.
Yes.
I didn't. I never knew that. But in a moment of brilliance, I called out there and got his number and left a message because he hadn't made it out there yet. And I freaked out, and I talked to his girlfriend. I thought, man, he's going to think that I'm just a stalker. And so I hung up, and I never bothered him again or anything like that. But I'm sure that that was weird for him, and I probably shouldn't have done that. But I just wanted, when I did get a hold of him, I just wanted to say, hey man, I just wanted to tell you how much your music had meant for me. I was talking with Matt about having you on. It's really, I'm really happy to have you on the show because, I've listened to your music I think since 2002 thereabouts,
Oh,
and
okay.
so it's just a real honor to have you and on the show and talk to you. And I was trying to convey that to him, but it was a really bad way to do it. But at any rate, later on, I reach out to Cat Hall here to talk with her because I thought she was the cat, and we had a lengthy conversation before she's finally got out of me who I was and who I thought she was, and what was going on. But thank you
This
for being nice to me and continuing to talk to me
there,
because
there seems to be a little bit of a trend here with
yeah.
you, but I think we might
Right,
have to
right.
maybe some counseling or something. I don't know.
Yeah. So the funny thing, and I'll get to more of that because things started kind of snowballing for Dissonance, which hadn't even been thought of yet when I moved to New York. So I basically had to find some way to get out of Shreveport, which is where I grew up and where I was living. And when I finished graduate school, or when I decided to not finish graduate school, let me put it that way, I went back to Shreveport and I kind of sat around for a month or two. And I said, you know what? I'm going to move to New York City. And the easiest way that I could think of to do that with no money and no job at the time was to get a job there. So I became a flight attendant for American Airlines, and I flew out of JFK, and my normal flight routes were Los Angeles and London
Hmm.
from New York. And so, I was there about half the time, and, sometimes I came down to the Dallas area, and basically it was just kind of an excuse for me to go to New York and start clubbing.
Right.
So, it was a great time to go to Limelight, and then I would go to, clubs in London, clubs in Los Angeles. Where my friend and co-writer Bob Durham had already moved out to Los Angeles. So, I was kind of touching base with a lot of different places, a lot of different clubs, and getting a feel for more of the music.
And you're right, boy.
And
New York is an anvil.
yeah,
That's one of, I travel there often for business, and I've told people this. I'm like, there is no such thing as a bad restaurant in New York City. It does not
no,
exist, because if it does, it's out of business so fast because the competition there is just brutal. But
right,
it's an amazing town, but holy cow, is it harsh.
right, right. So, I moved up there, and of course, when I was up there, Kurt was on tour in Brazil for most of that time. So I hardly ever saw him. I think I saw him maybe 2 or 3 times when I lived there. And then, of course, when he finally got back from tour is when they decided that, they were going to take a hiatus, and he was going to take Information Society, and he was going to move to San Francisco. So, I was still in New York, and I was going back and forth, across the country. And I went to Dallas a couple of times, and I met some people in Dallas, David Sabrand, my co-writer for Dissonance,
Okay, right.
and another crazy cohort of his, Tommy Mack, who was working at Brook Mays. He was a keyboard salesman. And so, of course, I was enticed. I was like, ooh, I should buy a keyboard, even though I'm a singer, and, that's what I really was into doing. I was like, if I'm going to be a musician, because it was beginning to take root, the idea that I might want to actually, do music of my own again, since I hadn't done it for quite some time. I had done it when I was in college, but, we had gone a couple of years since then, and I wasn't really doing anything. So, I started a band with David Sabrand, and we started coming up with some stuff that was pretty good. And at the same time, Jerry Beck was communicating with Kurt on Control Alt Delete, which was a synth pop magazine / fanzine for Information Society. But it was a collective of a bunch of synth musicians that were in and around Texas, that not just Texas, but a lot of us were in Texas. There were some other bands like Anything Box that was out of California, and then we had
Yeah.
some other bands that were in different areas, like Sister Friction was out of Minnesota, and I think he was calling himself Racket Club at the time. But there's a lot of bands that were around the country, and basically Kurt and Jerry Beck put this thing together, and it was a great little synth music collective. And they started putting out compilation CDs. And so, David and I were like, oh man, we got to be on one of these CDs. We got to do this. This is great. And so we started kind of gearing our stuff and writing, and we were featured on, maybe, let's see, I've got them on my wall here, like three of them, 1, 2, 3, I think 3 of them.
Wow.
And then there were a couple other compilation CDs that we just happened to be on at the same time, that came out at about the same time. But basically through these, Paul Robb started listening to some of the tracks that were coming out, and he was in the midst of deciding to start Hack Attack International, his record label. And so right at around 1995, 1996, I'm at home in Texas, and somehow, I don't know how, but he got my phone number, and he calls me up and he said, this is Paul Robb. I'm starting a record label, and do you want to be on it? And I was just blown away. I was like, here it is. It's fate again.
Wow.
Calling me and telling me that I'm supposed to be working with these people. I'm supposed to be doing this. And it was really cool because, I had been in contact with Kurt periodically, but I never had really gotten very close with Paul or Jim. And so this was an opportunity to get to know Paul, and I was very excited about it because, I was still such a fangirl, and, he is super talented, and just really, I just love the edge that he brought to the music. And so, basically he said, well, put together, about 10 tracks, and then we'll find a time for you to come up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is where he had his studio at the time, and we'll record an album. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. So essentially that's what David and I did. We got music together, and David flew up for 2 weeks and recorded the music, and then I flew up 2 weeks after that, and it was right over Thanksgiving when I went there, right after Thanksgiving. It was right near the holidays. So it was really cold, and I had bronchitis, and I was supposed to record my first album with bronchitis in Minnesota, where it was really butt cold, and
probably dry.
we did it.
Yeah.
We did it. It was, it happened, and it worked, and I had the best time. And Paul is a riot to work with. I love working with him, and it just that he made it so easy. He made everything look so easy, and I learned a lot. Although a lot of it was smoke and mirrors. I mean, I learned some vocal technique. I learned some production tips on how to record vocals. But as far as, the actual recording process, he was pushing all the buttons. So he was very much the producer of the vocals for our first Dissonance album. And it was just, and for the music, really, he put a lot of spin on what we had come up there with. And we even have some Star Trek samples that are in our first album. If you listen closely, you'll hear photon torpedoes and some other little snippets in there. So, we had a little tiny touch of, that little information society in there, which was so awesome for me.
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome.
And, we didn't really know what we were doing. I mean, it's Paul's label. It's an indie label. It was a very small operation. And so he just kind of let us go and press the CDs, and, didn't really give us much direction. And of course, I wasn't a professional musician at the time. I mean, I was trying to become one, but I didn't really know, what I was supposed to do. So we did some shows in and around Dallas and Fort Worth, and, but that was pretty much it. We got kind of sidetracked. Paul got busy with another of his groups, Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, and he moved out to Los Angeles. And he didn't have time to mentor me and tell me all of the stuff that I needed to do. And so for our second album, when we got ready to do that, I'm getting ahead of myself. We did a solo EP first.
Okay.
Like after our first album came out in 1997. And in 98, Paul had been listening to and watching Marilyn Manson grow. And he was like, oh, this is a new thing. This is something, we should do something aggressive. We should do something a little bit more, edgy and, would you like to do that? And so he sent me, some demo music. And I was just blown away. I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. This is going to be cool. And I can be a little bit more aggressive because I like to be a little bit more experimental with some of my vocals.
Mm-hmm.
And we had pushed the envelope a little bit with Dissonance, the first album, but Paul had seen me record, so he knew that, he knew what my voice was capable of doing.
Sure, right, yeah.
And so the Cat Hall EP came out, and it was a lot more aggressive.
Yeah.
And, it was playful and whimsical and edgy at the same time.
Yeah, and I've heard you use
menacing in a lot of ways.
and you use your voice in ways that I haven't heard, quite in the other albums. I thought that there's a few songs where, I thought it was really interesting what you had chose to do in that situation. I thought I that's one of my favorite. That and the last one.
Cool. Yeah, we did a lot of experimenting, and the vocals were something that I think on one of those there's 16 to 20 tracks of vocals.
Wow.
All singing together. So I do a lot of layering and stacking. It's not done with effects. It's done with layering and stacking and re-recording and re-recording and re-recording.
That makes it really thick and I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
Full. Yeah, it's
full,
large.
But
yeah.
like a pillow though. It's soft too. It's very interesting way to do it.
Right. So, and a lot of those were, we had some layers of singing, some layers of whispering, some layers of yelling. So it was mixed media for vocals. But again, a lot of fun. And this was when he was out in Los Angeles. And so, I got a chance to go out there and hang out with Paul in LA. And we had what I call the Paul and Cat years where, we would just I would go there and hang out and we would just have a blast, He came to Dallas, to visit me, and I took him to Six Flags, and we rode roller coasters, and it was just great. We were just big buddies.
Did you guys ride the Demon Drop? No, it's the cliffhanger there, isn't it?
Yeah, we didn't go on the cliffhanger. Okay. We went on the Titan. That was the new scary roller coaster, and Paul told me later he was just about to die on that thing. He was like, I had to do it because it was the manly thing to do, but it was terrifying.
Yep.
So yeah, that was a lot of fun. So anyway, we did that and drank a lot of wine and listened to a lot of Frank Sinatra, which Paul really likes, and I like too. And
sure,
we recorded crazy stuff, and then Paul got busy with Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon, and decided that he didn't really have a whole lot of time. So when David and I, who were still writing together, came up with our second album worth of material, Paul said, you know what, I've got my hands full right now. Maybe you can find another indie label to go with. And so that's what we did. We looked around, and I had met some other people at the time in a group called Oniroid Psychosis. They were very gothic, and I don't know if gothic is really the right word for them. They were very dark. And they were out of Wisconsin. And they were on another record label, Cop International. But they referred me to a friend of theirs, Christy Venrick, who had her own label, Nilaya Records. And so Dissonance started talking with Nilaya, and we decided we were going to go ahead and do a second album. So we did a cover of Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles, which is pretty ballsy. And I mean, who covers the Beatles? It's
so good.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Track. Oh my God, it's so
thank
good.
you. I'm always curious about how it's received, when people listen to that, because it is such a touchy thing to cover a band that is so beloved as the Beatles, and also a band that is, some songs you just don't dare touch. So, trying to do a cover and do it well is it's a touchy thing. So, I'm pleased that you enjoyed that track. It was always one of my favorites. and I think probably the most depressing Beatles song that was ever written. So, which is why it was close to my heart, because I suffer from clinical depression. So it's, it's just one of those things that speaks to me.
Yeah, the art, sure. Yep. It's
Yeah.
it's funny. It's kind of ironic. I sent that to my daughter because I literally got a couple days ago. She was talking about that song specifically. She's her group of friends are becoming Beatles fans again. Like
Right.
this next.
Everybody goes through that.
Yep, everyone, and then you go through
Every generation.
you go through your Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and Pink Floyd phase, right? Everybody does that. But
Right.
I sent that off to her because she had written me this thing where she had or she had this thing where she had come up with this like really dark interpretation of what that song was actually about. And then it was like, boom, I shot her that track. I'm like, you've got to hear this, But yeah, fantastic. I love that, the texturing and the layers of it. It just, oh man, it's haunting. It's a great track. Love it.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so we worked with Lars Hansen and Leif Hansen on production for Reincarnate. And at the same time, I was also doing some vocals for Oniroid Psychosis and for Signal 12. There's an album called Aphonia that Signal 12 put out on Cop International, and I have maybe 3 or 4 tracks on there that I do vocals for. And I think, I'm embarrassing myself because I can't even remember the name of the Oniroid Psychosis album that I did backing vocals on, but I'm on one of their albums as well. So,
Okay.
And coincidentally, I got engaged to Lars Hansen and moved
cool.
to Wisconsin. And that was in 2001. And I was there for 6 months when we both decided that that was not really going to work out. And so, yeah, that was great. That was an awesome time in my life.
Hey, I understand. I've been married and divorced 4 times, so
You're a pro.
I am.
You got it down now.
It's getting
don't you?
easier.
It was a definite. We actually didn't get married. We were just engaged, but I had quit my job and moved up there, and I was 100% invested. And he told me, he was like, you dove in with both feet, and me, I was maybe 40%. And so I was like, wow. So I had a lot of anger after that for a very long time, and I basically stopped writing. I didn't want to listen to music at all, and I was just really I don't want to say suicidal, but pretty much, yeah, I was suicidal for quite some time, probably about a year. And
love can be trying.
Yeah, it was very bad. And so, I kind of dove into my day job. I had started working at Texas Instruments, and I had worked there before when I lived in Texas. And so I went back and I got my job back, and basically decided that that was going to be my career. So I became a supervisor there and worked my way up through the ranks, and was in management, and that was my life for quite a while. And I missed doing music finally. It was probably about 2005. Somebody met my sister. My sister was a member of a barbershop chorus, a women's barbershop chorus. And there was a guy that was looking for solo singers. He was going to start a band, this guy whose name was Abid Hussein. And basically, he called me up and he said, your sister gave me your number. I hear you can sing. I want to start a band. And so this is where Chlorophyll was born. Abid basically went under the name Nebulae. And, he had several albums out. He's a producer in his own right. And so we started working on my Chlorophyll material, which I still think it's very viable. I think it's really good. I explored a lot of a softer texture with a lot of those tracks. And we also covered some of the Cat Hall EP. We did a cover of Bitter, and we did a cover of Step Off.
Okay.
So and they turned out really interesting. They turned out to be really, really awesome versions, and you can still get Chlorophyll on Bandcamp.
I was going to ask.
Um,
I that's the only thing that I haven't actually heard, and I wasn't. You said Bandcamp, okay? Because I
yeah, it is on Bandcamp.
okay,
Yeah, if
because I got
and
Void
I
from
think if you
Bandcamp.
look at my my website, there's also a link to it somewhere. I know there's a link to it on my SoundCloud, and there's a link to it on my Facebook page somewhere. If you scroll, 5 million messages down, you'll find it.
Oh, okay. So it's not like in the bibliography area. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha,
you'll have to
gotcha.
dig for it. Yeah.
I will.
So, but I think there is an actual link if you look at the SoundCloud links. If you look at my SoundCloud page and look at the links on SoundCloud, I think there is a link to Chlorophyll.
Is it available on CD?
Uh,
Like what is and is not, if anything, is available on CD? Because a lot of
well,
people
you
don't
can
do it
get,
anymore.
yeah, the first CD is out of print, but you can find some copies. Actually, somebody told me that they bought a copy recently, and they saw one for $400.
Wow.
I was like,
Wow.
wow, because I never made any money off of the first CD. I mean, we sold some, and so I made that money, and we made some money from shows, but Paul didn't. It wasn't really meant. It wasn't designed to make money. It was designed to be kind of a professional demo, kind of a you're on Hack Attack, and then maybe you'll get picked up by a bigger label. That was kind of the idea behind it. But he only pressed like 2,000 copies of Dissonance, and so it is rare. I mean, there's some copies floating out there, and you can get some used for fairly cheap, but if you find one that's still sealed, that's
Keep it sealed.
Yeah, right.
pretty rare.
Keep it
Yeah, it's
sealed and
pretty
get a hold
rare.
of you and ask you very nicely if you'll autograph it.
Right. Yeah. Actually, somebody called me the other day, and they found a brand new sealed copy, and they want me to sign it. So
Oh, that's
Awesome.
awesome.
Yeah, that's
they're
cool.
coming into the Dallas area, and they're going to get a hold of me, and I'm going to
Fantastic.
sign it for them. So
Awesome.
yeah, it's pretty cool. Who knew, right, that it would be actually worth something to someone? Because I tell you the truth,
It
I mean,
is.
Dissonance is we're like the best kept secret of dark wave music. I mean,
Yep.
it's kind of funny because I'm very humbled by all of the reviews that I read. They're very generous, they're very gracious and very complimentary, and I'm always always very warmed to read these things. And then I always look at nobody knows who we are, though.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're very underground. So, and it's a blessing and a curse. Everybody wants to be successful, but at the same time, I've been able to do things with my music without anybody saying, "Oh, you ruined the sound," or
Yeah, and I
you're
love
supposed
that.
to sound like this.
Yeah.
So we have changed our sound considerably many times. Reincarnate was very different from Dissonance,
Yeah.
and Void was completely different again.
Yep.
But I'm getting ahead of myself. So basically, I worked on Chlorophyll, and all things come to an end, and Abed decided that he needed to pass the bar and become a lawyer, and he also had a 7-year-old child, and he really just didn't have time to do music, and so he moved to New Orleans, and that was the end of Chlorophyll. We have thought about doing some collaborations long distance, but that hasn't actually transpired yet. It may in the future, because I really enjoy working with Abed, but it's not on the table right now, so that's okay. So I had gotten my feet back into doing music, and was kind of looking around, and I was still in management at Texas Instruments, and basically got sucked back into the corporate world, and just
Yeah.
living life, and pretty much until I got back in touch with Kurt, probably in 2015. And Kurt sent me a copy of their newest album, Hello World, and he also sent me some of their Orders of Magnitude album that they were working on at the time. And I listened to it, and I just got
Got
chills. I
urge.
got bit by the bug again, and I
Yeah.
was like, I need to be doing music. I need to be writing music. It's what I really want to do. It's what I love doing. It's an outlet for me. It's a passion, and it's therapy for me also. I
And I can
mean,
see how
it's
those two albums would rekindle that, because both of those albums had qualities of their stuff from long ago, but still sounded fresh and had a lot of new
yes, I
aspects to it.
loved Hello World. I thought Hello World was just perfect.
Yeah,
I thought it was
agreed.
really good. And they also sent me the unmastered versions that had all the samples in it. So, I have that, and I was listening to that, and I was just like, hot damn, this is this is a lot of fun,
Yeah.
and and it had all of the elements of Kurt and Paul that I just love so much. The vocals were just pristine, and Paul's sounds were just wonderful. It
And the
was kind of
musical
like,
choice is excellent for
yeah, it was
like
just
from their catalog in the past, and when
right.
especially when they did Orders of Magnitude 2, the choices that they picked on that album was excellent as well.
Right, right. So, just listening to that, I kind of turned a little green with envy and was like, yeah, I need to be doing this. And, that's when I reached back out to David and asked him, would he be interested in doing another album? And so, we started working in the summer of 2015 and came up with a track in fairly short order, and it was called Taste. And I think it's one of the best tracks that Dissonance has ever written, but no one has ever heard it, and it hasn't come out yet because it's very much David and Kat.
Gotcha.
And so we came up with that, and we started work on this third Dissonance album, and that's when David decided that he just wasn't really into it anymore. And I'd already spoken to Paul, and Paul had already said, if you give me a third album, I'll put it out. And so, and this is sight unseen. He hasn't heard any of it, and I was like, I can't let Paul down. Not that it would really be heartbreaking for him, but it would be heartbreaking for me.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So plus, just the opportunity to still be on Paul's label was just, I was one of the first artists that he signed to Hack Attack. And as a matter of fact, I think I probably was the first artist aside from Think Tank,
That's how
aside
I
from
came
his own
across you.
acts,
That's how I came across you with Step Off, and then went to the label site and seen that you had albums there, and that's how I heard of you.
Right, right. Yeah, he actually, Step Off is actually on a Think Tank and on my Cat Hall EP album. So it's actually in two places, which I think is really cool.
Yeah.
I actually didn't know that he had done that until I saw the Think Tank album online, and I was like, oh man, I'm on the Think Tank album. So, but a lot of the Cat Hall music, Paul is the co-writer for Cat Hall. The Cat Hall EP, Paul wrote all of that music.
Yep.
So and produced it. So in a sense, he is the band. So and I just, there's something about the direction he took with Think Tank, from Information Society, that I just loved it. It was just really like crack cocaine for me. I just really, not that I do drugs at all, which I don't, but I would imagine that it would be the same high.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because I listen. I've had all those albums, and that's just a constant staple in my playlist.
Yeah, yeah. I really, Think Tank is just something that I love to turn on and turn up really, really, really loud, and just, it's crazy and kinetic and wonderful, and everything that I love about Paul.
Yeah.
And I love that Paul brought some of those elements into the Hello World album and into Orders of Magnitude, and just, their new material is nice. But I've also really liked Paul's new ambient material. Have you listened to any of that?
I have all of that, and there's 4 albums now, I believe, and I love all of them. I'll put those on while I'm conversing with someone at the house, and I love it.
Yeah, yeah. See, he can do no wrong. Pretty much, Paul Robb is a super genius.
Yeah, and he does commercials too, right?
Yes, he does.
Does like a Heineken
he's won
commercial.
Clio awards.
Yeah, yeah.
I think he's got at least 2 Clio awards.
Yeah.
But he's just probably the most talented person I know, and he's actually, if I had to pick, my two favorite people in history on the planet ever, it would be Kurt and Paul, just because they've pretty much made my dreams come true with, if you're a fan and then you want to, meet the band, and then you want to, become a band, and then they
Yeah.
sign you to their label, and it's just, opportunities and just, wishes that have been granted.
And
So
I asked him if he would want to come on and talk about his new ambient albums, but he hasn't got back to me. I don't think he's seen the message yet, but I'm
Paul's
hoping
very
he will.
busy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, he's very
Absolutely.
busy.
All of them.
Right. So, you know, when I had mentioned that, David bowed out, and I did some work with Junior Kane, and, you know, uh, was trying to pull together this third Dissonance album, and it was really not happening. It was very frustrating. I felt like just beating my head against a wall, because, it just seemed like there was roadblock after roadblock. And, finally, a friend of mine who actually did a music review for Reincarnate and for our first album, Ilker Yücel is his name. He's the editor of Regen magazine. And, I reached out to him, and I was just like, I'm at my wit's end. I don't really know what to do right now. And he says, well, I'm going to put you in touch with Jim Marcus, because Jim will help you out. Jim can produce this for you. This will be no big deal. So I, got in touch with Jim Marcus and flew to Chicago, and basically Jim co-wrote a track, which is going to be called Star Stuff, and it's actually probably the best Dissonance song ever written. But of course, nobody's heard that yet either.
Right.
So anyway, our song that I wrote with David, Taste, and then several others, a couple that I had written with Junior Kane, are in this collection that's going to be in the album called Break Myself, which was supposed to be the third Dissonance album, but unfortunately, things started happening, just to kind of hang the album up. Jim Marcus had some irons in the fire, and, Jim is one of those creative geniuses that basically spreads himself too thin. And so he's got, a bazillion projects all going on at the same time. And so he's overcommitted. And so he's still working on the album. I mean, I've offered to pay him. I've offered to fly up there again. I've offered to, what is it going to take to get this album finished? And, he still tells me he's very, very nearly done. He wants to get it perfect. And, then he'll send it to me, and then we'll have remixes, and then it'll be available.
Cool.
But so while I was waiting for this album to materialize, I met Justin Burning online, and I was just itching to do some work. I needed to write. I was in a very depressed place where I just really was having a lot of angst. My father had been in failing health. My father is he was a very formative person for me. I mean, being, my father was also a singer. He was a pretty beautiful tenor, just had a wonderful voice.
Wow. And,
he always encouraged me, and he also was, my major professor with the geography and anthropology. And so he was definitely, big for me. I was very close to my father, and he had a brain injury in 2013 and had been going downhill for some time. And it was just wrenching for me. And so that, combined with some issues at work, just basically not really enjoying corporate life anymore, really just feeling that I wasn't being true to myself. The depression kicked in again, and I just needed to write. And so I basically reached out, and I put a couple of messages up on Facebook and some of the message boards, and I said, I do, electronic music. I do vocals, for electronic music. I'm versatile. I can do pretty much any style, from industrial to dance to ambient to you name it, I can do it. Does anybody have anything that they want to work on with me? And Justin sent me basically an ambient album that he had written for a film. And I said, wow, that's pretty cool. I think I can work with this. But then, as I was listening to it, a lot of it was in, crazy time signatures. Like we've got something that's in 7/8 time, and, just really strange keys and
Really progressive.
Yeah, it's it was a challenge. And so, but it really pushed my limits and made me work a little bit harder as a vocalist. And so you'll see on Void, there's a lot of angst and there's a lot of emotion in the vocals. And I think I've come up with some lyrics, some of the things that I was going through at the time, as far as like personal relations, a little bit of heartbreak here and there, a lot of heartbreak here and there. People just, living is painful a lot of times. And the last 2 years have been very painful for me. So Void was very much a catharsis. And, just it's even a hard album for me to listen to. It was a very hard album to write. And, listening to it even now will reduce me to tears sometimes, just because it just brings back, it just rips the scab off of wounds. And
I don't know if now's the time or not, but I had the phone in my hand where it's on my phone, and I was going to see, do you want to hear a track off of it a little bit?
Sure,
Okay,
sure. Pick one.
Okay. Let's see. I like this one. Just let me make sure I got everything set here.
There is little lower than I, with the means to smash myself, I would smash again and again and again, waiting for my pain to subside. Keep it all inside myself until I smash again and again and again. Lines of force bend and contort around me. Your life is being sucked dry around me.
So the track you chose to play is an interesting one. It was actually that's the only, well, aside from the Joy Division track, I did not write the lyrics for this track. Kurt Larson wrote the lyrics for Gravity Well.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting that you chose to play that one, because Information Society has always played such a huge role in everything that I've done musically. Basically mentoring me and giving me my start and giving me a lot of inspiration. Kurt has always sort of been like my go-to for advice. Pretty much, it's sort of like, if you had an imaginary friend, but they were actually a real person, that would be what Kurt is for me. Yeah. And it's cool, because of the way that we met, because it was kind of like, you get a 17-year-old and you throw MTV in their face, and, it's a real person, but it's something that was a dream. You send a fan letter to someone and you never expect it to be answered, and then they call you, and then you meet them, and then, you're talking with them on the phone, or you're sending letters to them, and it just almost never has seemed real to me. And so, you know, as a result of that, I really don't have a filter where he's concerned. And so pretty much anything that's going on in my life, I'll tell Kurt about it. Kurt knows my darkest, deepest secrets. And that's a good thing for
It
me. I
is.
mean,
It's nice to have someone that can fill that role and somebody that you can collaborate with too
and
in
he's
this way.
very tolerant. I'll put it that way, because I do have a tendency, especially when I'm depressed, I lash out. And because there is no filter, you never know what I'm going to say. And so, we've punched each other a little bit through the years, and but we're still. I like to think that we're very good friends. I mean, he is one of my very good friends. I don't know if he would classify me as more than an acquaintance or not, but basically we've known each other for almost 29 years now, almost 30 years.
Wow.
And we talk a lot. So he basically was hearing me talk about all of my trials while recording this album, and he sent me these lyrics for Gravity Well, and he said, these fit more with your music and the style that you're writing right now than they would with Information Society. So if you want to use them, here they are.
Great.
And so, yeah, I modified them just ever so slightly so that they would fit with the music. And there it is.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Now, if you had to pick one, what would you pick for someone that's listening to this podcast and maybe hasn't heard anything other than that? Like, what would you select for someone to introduce them to this album?
The first song that I wrote on the album was Get Through. That's track 3.
Okay, let's
And yeah, have a listen.
yeah, then yeah, just a second.
If it takes all night for me to get it right, I will give it everything. And if it takes my life to reach the other side, downwardly I'm spiraling, and in the darkness I feel your voice inside. You can tell me anything, it's in you I confide, with all that is in the light. You are all my suffering. I'll get through it. I'll get through it. I'll reach you. You're on the other side. You live inside my mind. I can't.
So tell us a little something about that track.
Well, if you listen to the lyrics, it's very clearly me speaking to my real life imaginary friend, talking about how they're my conscience, and I tell them everything, and I feel like I can tell them everything, but I'm spiraling down. I'm out of control, and I'm kind of losing touch. And it's a cry for help. It's a cry of just desperation. It starts out on a semi-positive, I'm gonna get through, I'm gonna be okay, but then reality kind of sets in, and we realize sometimes that we're not okay. And that's basically what the song is about, is that everything is not okay. And essentially, I was in a place where I was, talking to Kurt about things that were not going well in my life, and pain that I was having. And essentially what that is a letter to Kurt
And
about
you've turned
what's going on.
you've turned that tragedy into something very beautiful too with this
Thank you.
song. Well, thank you. That's
Yeah.
very cool, man. That's very cool. And while you were writing this album, you know, was there anything that was going on that was positive, or was it just bad when you were writing this?
Pretty much everything has been bad for the last 2 years.
Mm.
Basically, it's been roadblocks and frustration. I've been really, really trying to succeed and get my third album out and basically feel accomplished, feel like I've made some headway on something. And just things were happening that um, it seemed like I was getting rejections, and things were falling through. David didn't want to work anymore. I lost a co-writer, and actually when you lose a co-writer like that, when somebody backs out of a project, David co-wrote my first 2 albums, and it really was sort of like a divorce. I really felt
Yeah.
kind of betrayed in the middle of it, and especially because I was so invested in getting this third album done. I was very much, I essentially quit my day job with Texas Instruments. I had decided that I had enough of that, and so February of 2015, I basically told them, I can't do this anymore, and I quit. And I quit to start writing music.
Right.
And so, when you end a 20-year long career, because I had worked for them for pretty much 20 years, um, and you throw yourself into something and then it's not working out, you begin to question your motives. You begin to question everything.
Yep.
And at the time, I was also dealing with a lot of issues with my family, my parents, um, my marriage. My husband has been going through a stressful time as well, because when you're a dual income family and all of a sudden your partner just decides to quit, that's not an easy pill to swallow. All of a sudden half of your income is gone, and you're kind of in chaos, and you're wondering, do we need to sell our house? Are we going to be able to live like we're used to living? What are we going to do? And oh, by the way, both of my husband's parents died last year, and my father passed away this year, and now my mother is moving into our house with us, and it's just been like just a perfect storm
Yeah.
of tragedy. And it still is, and I'm still trying to reach out to Jim Marcus every day, like, can I have my stems for the third Dissonance album, which is now the fourth Dissonance album? Can I
Right.
finish this work? Can I do this? Because the work that I've written, the every song that you write, um, it's like a child. You've got a lot invested in it, and you love it, and you want the world to see this. You want it to succeed. You want it to come out. And the tracks that I wrote with David for this, and also the tracks that I subsequently wrote with Junior Kane, are very emotionally charged, and they're very much dissonance, and I feel very passionately about them, and I really want them to come out.
Yep.
And it's not Jim's fault really that he hasn't been able to finish his part. He's just had too much on his plate, and it's been very frustrating for me, because I love Jim, I love working with Jim, but at the same time, I can't take the project away from Jim, because it will lose something. It won't sound the same. It
Yeah.
won't have the same punch.
Yep.
And so I really have to wait for Jim. And Void came out as just a pining and a hole in my soul, because all of the tragedy, of all of the just spiraling downwards into hell that the last 2 years have been and continue to be. The one bright spot being that Void did come out, and it was a beautiful album, and
Yes, indeed.
it did get a lot of really beautiful reviews from people, and it did speak to people, and that is meaningful to me. I am honored that people have taken the time to, post things about it, and I just wish that more people would hear it. That's the main thing. I because I don't have a lot of help from a major label, and I don't. Paul is very busy doing his own thing, and they're on the Star Trek cruise right now, so I can't
Yes.
ask Paul to help me. He's busy.
Yeah.
So it's been just me, and I've been doing it. Even though Justin has helped, considerably, and he co-wrote the whole thing. Justin just doesn't really like to get out there and promote, and
Oh, I
I don't
understand
blame him.
that.
it's not a whole lot of fun,
Nope.
to basically try and get people to listen to your stuff, especially if it's something that they've never even heard of you, and why should they take a chance on something new? You're not the new Marilyn Manson, or you're not the new, there's other albums that they're familiar with. Why should
Well,
they try something new?
and let me say this as a listener and as a fan, but certainly as a listener to this album as a unique experience and not based on things from the past. This album is a journey. It's a journey lyrically and musically. It's not something you listen to with just one track or two. You start from the beginning and you end at the end. And it's been a long time since I've heard an album come out that has that flow to it that you just don't want to hear one track in the middle of it or anything. And that's what I would say to people who are thinking about this album and purchasing it. I would say do so for that journey experience, because it's going to be one of those albums that you can put on and listen to with your headphones, and you don't it's not something that you put on in the background to have a conversation to or to clean your house to. It's like a personal inward journey. And those albums are always worth having because they end up meaning something different and personal to every person, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of funny because when the album came out, I remember telling Kurt that, well, Void is coming out. It's it's going to be released, and Kurt basically told me, I was a little bit afraid at the time, because I was like, well, this isn't like Dissonance, that we've had before. It's a lot more low tempo. It's not dancey. It's not, it's very down tempo for what people are used to hearing from Dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
And basically Kurt compared it to Don't Be Afraid. He basically said,
Yeah.
When my album came out, it was a journey for him. It was a very important album for him.
Yep.
And he said, do it for yourself. Don't really care what other people
Yeah.
think. This is an important album for you.
And both of you guys
And
stitched
it
that all
was.
together with your voices. Like, you can tell there's a huge difference between Come to Mama and Void, but you tie it there's still a common DNA there between those. And I feel that Kurt did the same thing with Don't Be Afraid. I feel like you guys have such strong, beautiful voices that it's more than an instrument when you're listening to it in the mix. It's a style in an instrument, right? So when it goes from one style to another one, there's still that bit of you in
Yeah.
what you're doing.
Definitely.
Right. Yeah, no matter what I record, you can always tell that it's Cat Hall.
Yeah.
It's always me. I've got one of those unmistakable tones, I guess. And either you like it or you don't. So, you can always tell the people that like Dissonance and the people that are just like, not my thing. But that's one thing that I really do attribute to listening to so much information society, is I really loved the way that the vocals were recorded always.
Yeah.
And I loved the clarity, I loved the enunciation, I loved the harmonies, and I loved when they would put in little a cappella bits, because that to me just made my hair stand on end. I could hear it, would just make the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I was just like, oh yeah, that is awesome to me.
I,
There's something about, you know, a voice when it's used well and the harmonies are perfect,
yeah,
that just, you know, does it for me.
that's one of the
And
things.
Information Society always
Yeah,
has.
that's one of
So
the things that pulled me to their music was in their first album was the thick choruses where people were
hmm
singing a chord as opposed to just, singing a note together or a couple of notes. And
right.
I heard Paul in an interview, I don't remember which one it was, but he was saying that Duran Duran taught him how to structure chords like that. And they're one of my favorite bands too. I have everything they've ever done, and I'm like crazy about them too. So it was interesting to hear that there's this common thread in that
hmm
way that goes through everyone that I end up liking. I'm seeing everything that I like. All these people are doing the same thing as opposed to what other people are doing, and it's just interesting to see that that's all there.
That genealogy.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of like, you know, I took what Kurt did with his vocals, and I kind of made it to the extreme because I stack and stack and stack and stack.
This is brilliant though.
And, you know, and it's just gets to the point where, and even Paul told me, I think when we were doing our first album, there was one track, I'm trying to remember the name of it now. What's the track? I'm looking at the album right now. Unwhole. Yeah. I had too many vocals. And Paul was like, I really don't know what to do with these. I don't know what to do with these. And because I had so many parts. And finally, he just left them the way they were and, you know, mixed them. And that's the way Unwhole came out. You
Wow.
know, it had all of the parts in it that I put in it. But initially, he was a little bit like, well, it's too much. And even now, when I like, for instance, when we were getting ready to mix and master Void, there was a person that I was working with, and he offered to basically mix it for me. And so I sent him, you know, the raw vocals, and basically he was like, "Fuck," he was like, you know, this is too much. He's like, this is, you know, he didn't know what to do with it
Wow.
because, you know, you send somebody, you know, 40 tracks of vocals, and, I sent him a rough mix of what I wanted it to kind of sound like, and he just couldn't put it together and couldn't get it where I needed it to go.
Hmm.
And, we finally, came to a meeting, Justin and I did, and we did it ourselves. And, that seemed to be a lot easier. I'll basically put it together. Justin, will tweak it a little bit, and essentially, I would say probably 60% of the time I come back to Justin and say, okay, you produce the music and let me produce the vocals, because I did them the way I wanted to do them. And I don't want them to sound like, these
Yeah.
other people. A lot of people compare me to This Mortal Coil, a lot of 4AD vocalists. And,
I think
I'm
of Alison
flattered by
Moyet.
that. Yes, I've been compared to Alison Moyet. She's got a really strong alto, and she does a lot of harmony stuff, but she does
Yeah.
a lot more. She's a lot more soul oriented than I am.
Mhm.
I don't have soul.
Yes. Yeah. Your voice is much more ethereal. It's really awesome.
But I love Alison Moyet, and I basically came up listening to Yaz and her solo albums. And some of my biggest influences have been I listen to the Eurythmics. I like them too. I like Annie Lennox.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like Liz Fraser. I love Cocteau Twins. I recently, for a side project, did a cover of Crushed by the Cocteau Twins.
Huh.
And it came out on a compilation. And it to me, it sounded, I was a little afraid to do it. It was kind of like covering Eleanor Rigby, because, you're kind of scared to, you're going to cover the Cocteau Twins. That's a little difficult. Liz Fraser is very, very hard to do. And I did it in my own way, and I didn't try to copy what she did,
Right.
but it turned out well.
Yeah.
And I was really pleased with it. And I had been working on some shoegaze material just because it was like a different avenue for me to take. But then, unfortunately, the co-writer for that dropped off the face of the earth.
Huh.
So that project will never see the light of day. And that is a tragedy because it was shaping up to be brilliant.
Hmm.
I find your voice to be a great bridge, and as someone who I'm coming from a straight rock blues guitarist background, okay,
Mhm.
and one of the things I love about so both your voice itself, but also the unconventional way with which you record. I find both of those things to be a really amazing bridge for someone over to the electronic side of and synth side of music making. Personally,
Yeah,
I think
I can see that.
I just like the way it all because it's that it blends so well together, and like I said, the way that it's not just your voice, it's the way you record too. It's unconventional, so it fits, and
Right.
I just love it. It works. I love the way it works.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very flattered.
Do you think in the
Yeah.
future that if there's a longer wait on these stem tracks for what was to be the third album, Break Myself, do you think that you would do another Dissonance project in between with?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'm working on one now. Like I mentioned that I was doing another album with Justin Burning,
Mhm.
and it's been kind of slow going. A lot of it was written. Actually, one of the tracks was written the morning my father died, and I wasn't aware that he had died when I wrote that. But pretty much the time that I finished it, he had passed away,
I'm sorry.
and just it's very emotional. And again, it's going to be a very raw emotional record. It's probably going to be a little bit more edgy than Void. It's going to be harder than Void. I might do a little bit more. I don't want to say it'll be yelling in the same vein as Cat Hall, but it's going to be a little bit more aggressive than the vocals on Void. But it'll have that same kind of depressing slant to it because, let's face it, my life hasn't taken the upswing yet. So
But it will. It will. It
maybe
has
it
to.
will and maybe it won't. We don't know. But, for the purposes of the album, it's going to be called Precipice. We've already
That's
picked
good.
out a title,
I like
and
that. Yep.
Justin has already sent me, I think, 4 music tracks to do vocals to. So we're starting on that.
Fantastic.
And Jim Marcus, of course, still says that Break Myself is very, very close to being done. He's told me that they laid down some guitar tracks, which I didn't even know we were going to put guitar on it. But it's kind of interesting because I've always been in charge of my albums. I've always been the driving force behind my albums. And now that I've taken it to Jim, I don't have any control over it. I did the vocals, and that portion is complete, and I haven't heard anything since I basically was there in October of 2016.
Mm. To
So,
be a bit of a
and
surprise to you when you do.
it will be,
Probably a
and
little scary too, given
it is
this is a
scary.
new. Yeah.
It is scary. And I mean, I love Jim Marcus. I love Dee Wartzow. I love everything that he's done. I love his new material with Go Fight. Pigface is fantastic. All of the stuff that Jim has worked on has been really good. So I'm not really, I'm not worried that it's not going to sound good. I'm, based on what I did hear from our collaboration that we worked on the week that I was there, I know it will sound good, but I just there's that back of my mind, just constant nagging that, this is my baby and I don't have control over it and I don't know what it sounds like and it's been a year and what the hell is going on?
Right.
And and Jim works differently than I do.
Mm.
So, he is not as much a collaborator as he is a driver. And so he's going to do it in his own time, and I'll get the stems in my own time, and then I'll find people to do remixes. And then once we're, over that hump, we'll have to master it
Yep.
and
Yep.
put it together and send it to Paul, and Paul will put it out.
Cool. It will happen.
I
Yeah.
fully expect it to be on Hack Attack.
Good to know.
Jim has his own label, but basically, I had already talked to Paul, and really, based on my history, I love being on Hack Attack. It's home, it's it's where I like to be.
Right. Yeah.
So
And
um,
he's got another artist on there now too, right? Just three. Him, you, and another, right?
oh yeah, Paul has several artists on Hack
Does he?
Attack. There's
Okay.
Information Society is on Hack Attack now.
Oh, okay.
Then Falcotronic is also on Hack Attack.
Yep.
Falcotronic is an awesome kind of glitch core
Oh yeah.
project.
Yeah, I have all the
That
albums.
Zeke
Yeah.
Prebluta, he's really fantastic, and super great guy too, and is also now a member of Information Society.
And a huge Star Trek fan and on the
kind of
boat,
like
right?
right. We had a kind of a running joke. Kurt was saying that because he's won Star Trek, because not only did he get to use the Leonard Nimoy sample of Pure Energy, but basically they've been the Star Trek sample kings, and now he's
Oh
on the
yeah.
Star Trek cruise, and he's getting
Yeah.
to meet all of these people, and he's worked with some of them in the past, and
That's awesome.
so it's really cool. And he's saying that
Fanboy.
he's saying that he won Star Trek, and I was like, well,
Hell yeah.
I won Information Society.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
I got all of this, I got to meet you, I got to do the music, and
Yeah.
I got signed, and but Zeke kind of beat me out, because not only did he get signed,
He got to be a
but
member.
he also got to be in the band. So, but I mean, I have gotten to be on stage with them before, once or twice. They did ask me to do kind of guest vocals when they came through Austin and Dallas, and so I've sung on stage with Kurt and Paul and Jim before, and it's been a lot of fun. And actually, there is a possibility that Kurt and I might do a collaboration
That'd be nice.
sometime in the future. I think our vocals would sound fantastic together. I think it would be really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
But basically, we're talking about maybe trading off verses and doing harmonies together. And it's no secret. I've always told Kurt and Paul that I really want to do the backing vocals on their next Information Society album,
Yeah.
because I think that I would be perfect to do that, and I could really bring a lot of interesting harmonies. And not that they don't do it already. I mean, they're fabulous and they don't need me, but I think I could just maybe kick it up a little bit.
Yep.
But
I agree.
just bring a little bit of Cat to the mix.
It'd be awesome.
But anyway, we'll hope that, we'll cross our fingers that maybe they'll be amenable to that, although who knows, we'll
Yep.
see.
That'd be cool. Man, I really want to tell you thank you very much for hanging out with us and talking with us about all of the albums and things. I appreciate that very much.
It's truly been my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for taking the time and being interested.
No, anytime. And look, if any of your other future projects that are coming up here, if you want to jump back on and
Yep,
talk about
absolutely.
those and get some exposure, we're more than happy to do that.
Yeah.
We'd love to have you back. Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So good. Well, I guess that's where we'll wrap up tonight. Kat, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate you coming on here and giving us a history lesson that I didn't expect, as well as letting us kind of talk to you about things that are near and dear to your heart. That's the show for tonight. Appreciate everybody listening, and we'll catch you next time.